worth of weapons to Ukraine through NATO allies. He's also threatening to impose 100% secondary tariffs on Russia if no peace is reached in 50 days. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good afternoon, Iris. What's in the latest announcement today? Talk to us.
Good afternoon to you as well, Don. So during a sit-down meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte this morning at the White House, President Trump announced that the U.S. would now allow NATO nations and European countries to buy advanced weapons made by the U.S., including, for example, advanced missile systems like the Patriot missiles, as well as air defense systems for them to be sent to Ukraine to help it defend the war against Russia. It comes as Trump stresses that security in Europe is important, and also Rutte says that it's going to provide some significant help to Ukraine. Watch.
We're going to be sending them weapons, and they're going to be paying for them. We want to defend our country, but ultimately, having a strong Europe is a very good thing.
It will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment. So if I was Vladimir Putin today, I would reconsider whether I should not take negotiations about Ukraine more seriously than I would.
Meanwhile, both leaders today emphasized that speed is of the essence here. President Trump says that missiles like the Patriot missiles can arrive in Ukraine within days, and Rutte says that the U.S. will be backfilling the country's stockpiles of weapons to allow them to quickly move equipment into Ukraine. Meanwhile, the fresh U.S. support today comes as President Trump is growing increasingly frustrated with Russia's Vladimir Putin, especially as Trump says that Russia has continued to bombard Ukraine despite what he calls pleasant calls that did not yield actual results. Now President Trump is vowing 100% in secondary tariffs are targeting Russia if it did not reach a peace deal within the next 50 days. Watch.
I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%.
Meanwhile, for months, President Trump has been trying to negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, though he says that he has not imposed a strong and heavy sanctions on Russia in hopes of reaching a peace deal. But now he's giving this ultimatum to Russia, saying that Putin has been doing all talks, but no solid action.
And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything. The talk doesn't talk. It's got to be action. It's got to be results.
Meanwhile, on a Senate bill that would impose even steeper sanctions on Russia, President Trump today responded saying that he's not sure if the U.S. needs it, but it could be very useful. Back to you, Don.
And Iris, please explain for us how secondary tariffs work and which countries might be hit the heaviest with such sanctions.
Sure. So specifically, secondary sanctions really mean that it's targeting countries who are doing trade with Russia, because the U.S. actually does not do that much trade directly with Russia. So the country that's expected to be hit the hardest in this potential scenario will be actually China, who is the leading trade partner, the largest trading partner with Russia, as China imports a ton of Russia's crude oil as well as natural gas. And if the U.S. actually imposes what it calls secondary tariffs on trading partners with Russia, that means that if China continues to trade with Russia, it would face a 100% tariff for its goods and trying to come into the U.S. And essentially, that will force China to really choose between to continue trading with Russia or to really try to preserve its market access with the U.S., which, of course, it relies on for its market export-driven economy inside China. Remember that escalated trade tensions during the past few months, but before a tariff ease between the two countries really struck China's economy. And as President Trump previously said that there even was some domestic unrest in China because of the economic impact of high tariffs. So it remains to be seen, of course, if any peace deal is struck in the next 50 days, and if that actually happens when U.S. imposes 100% secondary tariffs on trading partners with Russia, how China will then react. Don.
Okay, Iris, thank you so much. In Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with U.S. envoy Keith Kellogg today. Speaking during a meeting in the presidential office, Zelensky said he spoke to Kellogg about air defense. Here he is.
We are thankful to President Trump for his all messages and very strong decisions about resuming delivers for us, and we are thankful for bipartisan support. Just now we spoke about air defense with General.
Zelensky wrote on social media that they also discussed sanctions against Russia. On Sunday, Zelensky said he instructed military commanders to brief Kellogg on Russia's capabilities and Ukraine's prospects. He said negotiations on further support will take place during the week. He also said he wanted the U.S. to understand fully what could be done to compel Russia to make peace. Kellogg will also meet the leaders of Ukraine's security service and intelligence service. President Donald Trump says the United States will deliver Patriot air defense missiles to Ukraine. Speaking to reporters, Trump said the U.S. will not bear any costs for the weapon for Ukraine. The European Union will cover the costs. So joining us now to discuss is David Wormser, senior analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former senior advisor to U.S. Vice President Cheney on Middle East and strategic affairs. Good afternoon, David. So also today, the latest is that President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 100% secondary tariff on Russian goods. So if Moscow, that is, if it doesn't agree to a deal to resolve the Ukraine conflict within the next 50 days, that was the condition. How does this differ from previous sanctions imposed by the U.S. and allies? Can you tell us about that?
Well, previous sanctions, the more primary sanctions, only affect Russia so much. We don't trade very much with Russia. We don't import oil or gas from them for real. So there's only so much really primary sanctions would have an effect. The other thing is we had personal sanctions against various leaders in Russia and so forth, which could be worked around. It's not a real effective structure to impose sanctions. When you're dealing with secondary sanctions, then you're dealing with people who have a choice. Do they trade with Russia or don't they trade with Russia? Or do they trade with Russian officials or don't they? And it's a question of cost benefit for them. Yeah, I mean, there's always ways to work around sanctions, but if it becomes too prohibitive, people start saying, nah, it's just not worth it. And that's where those are therefore the sanctions that can really begin to make a difference.
What is your feeling on how effective they could be in pressuring Putin to agree to a peace deal?
Well, I think they can be effective in hurting Russia. I'm not sure it will dissuade Russia from what it's after. At the end of the day, I'm not sure that President Putin is really able anymore to back down on this and to come to a real ceasefire, maybe in the long term. But for the moment, if he accepts a ceasefire, he admits the futility of his adventure in Ukraine. And that could have fairly significant internal implications as well. So I think we're in a very difficult place for him, where on one side, he politically needs to show a victory, but on the other side, a victory just eludes him.
And David, on Trump's decision,
become frustrated.
So, sorry, let me just interrupt for a moment here. I want to get your comments as well today on President Trump's decision to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine, but have the EU at the Center for Security Policy. So, David, what do you make of President Trump's decision to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine, but have the EU pay for them?
Well, first of all, it's good the EU pays for them because right now, obviously, the United States is taxed out. The American people really don't want to pay for more. But as far as the missiles themselves, it's quite a reasonable and frankly, it's surprising that there really hasn't been more air defense sent to Ukraine until now. The fact that they've been facing waves after waves of missiles and drones, there really is no effective defense that anybody's helped them with, has been a problem from day one. So this is actually a very smart move to minimize Russia's continued assaults on civilian targets and cities.
Now, this is something new in recent years, at least. How do you think European leaders are looking at this move?
Well, I think they're looking at it with a deal of hope. They've always looked at the war in Ukraine and Ukraine's military as the largest land army in Europe other than Russia's, and therefore it's a bulwark against potential Russian expansion and aggression into the rest of Eastern, Central, and Western Europe. So for them to see the United States evolve and move more and more in the direction of also seeing Ukraine's defense as something that is a Western interest, I think they're seeing the administration moving in their direction, and I think they're quite happy with it.
Okay, you used the word evolve. I want to build on that. Is this a shift in Trump's approach to the Russia-Ukraine war?
Oh, absolutely. Until now, the United States, under President Trump, made it very clear that the United States wants both sides to stand down and end this, and end it immediately. And Russia simply hasn't fulfilled its end of the bargain, according to the Trump administration. And as a result, you're seeing a growing appreciation of what Zelensky had been saying earlier, which is you just can't trust Putin. And that is essentially where the United States is slowly heading. That's, of course, also where the Europeans had concluded a few years back. So, yes, it is an evolving policy which does see Ukraine no longer as a neutral, but more as a victim in this ongoing conflict at this stage.
But David, I do wonder, because Trump said today he wants a ceasefire or a peace deal in 50 days. Is this move going to affect those efforts to negotiate a deal?
Well, if anything, I think it may help. I mean, you see this also with Israel and the Middle East. I mean, President Trump is very clearly an ally with Israel, sees it as one of America's closest allies, but he still wants ceasefires. But he understands that sometimes there are countries that do not accept the logic of a ceasefire, don't accept a ceasefire unless they feel that it's hopeless to try to win. So in this case, I think he believes that Russia, and I think he's correct, if Russia understands that its continued efforts against Ukraine are only antagonizing America, driving it more into the Ukrainian side, and Ukraine will, as a result, get stronger, that's an incentivization to Russia to begin to come to terms with a ceasefire, even if it involves Putin's not fulfilling all his ambitions.
Okay, can you lay it out for us very simply? I think you've alluded to this, but is this a shift from his previous tone, President Trump on Putin?
Yes, it is. He doesn't trust him as much. He doesn't believe that he's operating in good faith. And that came out from some of the statements and so forth. And as a result, he is operating now with the assumption that force and incentives have to move President Putin rather than trust and agreements. And that's a fundamental shift in his policy toward Putin himself.
And if the U.S. gives Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, is that going to improve Ukraine's ability to defend against Russia dramatically, significantly?
I do believe it helps some. The Patriot missiles are not as effective as some of the other air defense systems we've seen used lately in various other theaters, but it is a fairly effective structure for hitting drones, which have been one of the worst weapons that have afflicted Ukraine in its cities. It is not a bad system for drones, and it does shoot down some missiles. Not hermetic, but it's a much better system, and that it's also psychologically incredibly important. If you know you can hit some of the missiles and drones down, even if you can't hit them all, you don't feel as vulnerable, which is what Ukraine was feeling. Is just complete exposure and vulnerability.
Would you characterize this move, David, sort of as the U.S., pushing Europe to lead in this whole situation?
Yeah, I think still that the basic Trump outlook, which is we need our allies to step up to the plate and fill the gap between what is an overextension of American power and where we really want to readjust it to, and yet maintaining the Western alliance. I think this is a good example. We sell to Europe weapons. We're willing to give them the tools to defend themselves. But Europe has to step up to the plate and give Ukraine the tools to defend themselves, but American troops will not go into Ukraine to defend Ukraine. So I think this is a perfect example of the new strategic concept that President Trump brings to the world. We saw it in the Middle East, too.
So I've been following this, and a few days ago, there was a report that the United States apparently wants other countries to show their stance in terms of a hypothetical Chinese invasion into Taiwan. So I'm wondering, putting these two reports together, is the Trump administration, do you see this intent for Europe to pay for Ukraine's defense as a maybe potential strategy to shift U.S. focus away from Europe and toward countering China in the Pacific?
Well, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, we know Elbridge Colby, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, believes Asia is the primary theater and that you don't want to divert too much power elsewhere. But I do think that it's a model, which it started in the Middle East, where we basically enjoyed the fact that Israel stood up and attacked and took down our main regional enemies. And now we have Europe, which is, we hope, will step up to the plate and defend Europe from Russia without America having to commit large amounts of troops or even a lot of coin. And therefore we can focus on Asia. But I still think even in Asia, the United States wants to see our allies do the best they can to step up to the plate and deal with the Chinese threat. And therefore, you see the push also to ask Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan exactly what can you do for the overall team here. We realize it's a team, and we realize this is where we have to put our effort. But still, we need to know what each of us on the team can do.
Okay, just one last question, David. Do you think that perhaps the Chinese Communist Party is watching what the U.S. is doing right now in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, in the sense that whatever the U.S. does, it is watching and the stakes are high?
Oh, yes. First of all, the secondary sanctions may apply primarily to them, which would be catastrophic. But beyond that, the more the United States, they thought that there was an isolationist mood in America, and what you're seeing with President Trump is it's a careful deployment of American power, but not a refusal to deploy American power. And that means a lot to China in a negative way. China was counting on the fact that the United States was withdrawing regionally from Europe, from the Middle East, and from Asia. They were counting on the isolationism, and it's not there. President Trump is not an isolationist. He's just very cautious in deploying power and very aggressive in making our allies step up to the plate. So I think China's very worried about it. They're worried about a lot of things. They're also worried about how Iran was taken down by Israel, because this is a great equalizer of warfare, the way it was done. So China's had a very bad month.
Well, okay, David, always great to hear your insight. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
President Trump today joined a luncheon with business leaders who donate their time to faith-based